And not surprisingly, one of the things that comes through in our research is that British and Irish consumers have a very different way of engaging with businesses online. So, for example, just to draw your attention to a couple of the key findings here, the level of agreement with the statement, having a catalogue to hand helps me to choose what I want to buy online. Much, much higher in Ireland than in Britain, and clearly indicates that consumers are very comfortable with that combination of online and offline. It's the and part of marketing communication strategy that Amy referred to in her introduction. People are looking for offline and online in terms of that mix of tools, of solutions, of messaging and advertising communications that will make their life easier, deliver them convenience, make them feel safer, secure, all of those things. And we see very significant differences in terms of the consumer experience. Just to highlight a couple of others, when I have a catalogue while shopping online, I often see additional items I would like to buy. Again, significantly higher levels of agreement among Irish consumers with that particular statement than among UK consumers. Another indication just of the very different appetite or experience that Irish consumers have with the media through the line, above the line and online, in terms of responding to these different offers. And I should highlight another very important one at the bottom. I enjoy receiving catalogues in the post. In fact, one of the things that we see constantly coming through our research is that people in Ireland and in Britain as well see the value in the delivery of marketing communications through the post, be it catalogues, be it messages, be it letters that are relevant to them, that help them manage their lives, be more, feel more in control, etc. So it's just another indication that when you think about targeting or reaching the Irish consumer in the context of your marketing plans for 2012, and if you're engaged in a conversation with colleagues, be it in the UK or further afield, these findings point to a very different level of engagement with the mix of media, not just the traditional media, the radio, the TV, the press, and so on, but also the new media in terms of online and interaction with brands via Twitter or Facebook, etc. So it's a fascinating dynamic. We're really only at the start of this. This is what's fascinating here, is that despite the recession, the Irish consumer has become much, much more sophisticated in relation to using the tools and solutions online, be it on smartphones, be it on the web, and in managing the combination of more traditional media such as catalogues with the convenience of online. But there are still important differences when it comes to the actual experience of media on the part of consumers in Britain and Ireland. Let's look, for example, specifically at direct mail type media, whether it's flyers or leaflets through the doors, letters that are addressed, or other types of bill inserts and so on. You can see here, for example, significant differences in the volume. So UK consumers, 31% of UK consumers are getting 6 to 10 flyers or leaflets through the door in an average week, compared to just 22% of Irish consumers. Similar differences in terms of addressed communications or in terms of bill inserts and other communications. And these differences are important because what it tells us is that, if anything, we're still at a relatively immature phase of development in terms of some of these communications channels, these marketing channels, in terms of reaching Irish consumers. What's extraordinary in a way is that despite the openness, the engagement, the trust that our research points to on the part of Irish consumers in particular when it comes to direct marketing, direct mail, the post, but also media in general, as you've seen, some of these media are still not used as frequently or as intensely as they are in the UK, as reported in this particular research. And it goes beyond just the experience. It's also, I think, an important shift in terms of attitude. One of the questions that we asked in our research was about how enjoyable do you find advertising from the following media, TV, newspapers, and so on. Again, when you take the like a lot or enjoy them very much, you get significant differences on the part of Irish consumers versus UK consumers in relation to advertising, the enjoyability of advertising in terms of TV. Obviously, a big standout here is in terms of radio. We just have a completely different relationship with radio in Ireland versus UK, and of course it's mostly regional radio as well as local, and of course some national radio, but that very different experience still stands out there. And indeed, below that, personalised letters, leaflets in the post. We have half of the adult population saying they enjoy receiving advertising marketing communications through that particular channel, significantly more than in the UK. So it simply reinforces the message here that when you seek to engage Irish consumers in 2012 through the palette, the mix, the toolbox of different marketing channels, marketing solutions, you actually have a very you're starting from a much more positive place than, say, UK-based marketing and communications organisations, because we have just a very different attitude, a very different mindset that is good news for you. But there's something else as well. I think that word enjoyable, it kind of talks to something I think very important, and that is around excuse me, the emotional well-being. I started off talking about confidence. Confidence is a measure of psychology, a measure of emotion, particularly about the future. One of the things that we've been tracking in Ireland has been around, for example, people's feelings since April 2009, so nearly 3 years ago. We've been tracking the level of agreement with which of the emotions people feel the most in Ireland. And enjoyment and happiness, actually the two most dominant emotions in Ireland. Right up to this month, our February results there at the very end. Now, there was a bit of a wobble in November 2010 when the IMF came calling, but things returned to normal thereafter. And in fact, if anything, in our most recent wave of research, there appears to have been an actual improvement in the emotional well-being of consumers in terms of happiness and enjoyment. And that's important because, if you want to communicate to businesses or to consumers and you want them to feel positively towards your brand, your product or your service, then plugging into these powerful positive emotions puts you in a good place, because you're plugging into some of the dominant emotions for the majority of Irish adults today. And indeed, it's worth noting that historically, when you measure things like quality of life, satisfaction with life, all of those different indicators across Europe, Irish people have always been consistently among the happiest, the most content in terms of quality of life, going back really to the 1990s, even through the various recessions that we've had, and always much happier than the UK in that regard. In fact, we've been usually above the European average, up there usually with the Danes or one of those other sort of northern European countries. The UK is often at the EU average, even below the EU average in terms of happiness, subjective well-being, quality of life. So we just seem to have a different emotional setting, thermostatic setting perhaps, in terms of our well-being, our state of mind. And that's important because it also tells you that in terms of the emotional content, the emotional message, maybe it's the brand essence of your particular product or service, you need to plug into that different psychological DNA for the Irish consumer in order to maximize both the resonance with the consumer, with the target audience, and of course to maximize the impact of that in terms of consumer behavior, be it buying more of your product or switching to your product from an incumbent, etc. So really, just to sum up that particular part of the commentary, what we're finding here is that there's been this collapse of trust. It's been a collapse that has affected mostly government, mostly politicians, mostly the banks, but it hasn't stopped there. Businesses haven't escaped. Businesses, perhaps even your business, is still outside the circle of trust. Getting back inside the circle of trust will require the right mix of messages, the right mix of channels, the right mix of solutions to people's needs in 2012 and beyond. But we do appear in Ireland to have a very different, much healthier, perhaps more positive relationship with media, be it above the line in terms of TV, radio, or below the line in terms of direct mail, in terms of dress post. So we're therefore much more trusting of the media in Ireland than our UK counterparts versus other institutions in general. And this clearly translates into greater likability in terms of towards advertising in general, towards post and catalogues in particular, given the convenience element of that married to the surge in online behaviour right through the recession. So that likability, it improves cut-through, it improves return on insight, return on investment for marketers in Ireland if the mix in terms of the emotional DNA, the fit with people's needs and circumstances is right, as well as the combination of channels. So it looks like the generally positive emotional disposition of Irish consumers has survived so far. And that tells us something about the challenge that, or the opportunity that faces you as you look to unlock your share of that 81 billion euro spend by consumers this year, and another 81, 82 next year, rising gradually to 86, 87 billion by 2016. So unlocking all of that is, I think, getting more than your fair share, if you like, of that is, I think, the big opportunity in 2012. But I want to say a few words finally in the last section about what you have to do in order to exploit this greater affinity, this stronger emotional trust, these different emotional profile, as well as the demography, as well as the economic circumstances. How do you connect in 2012 with the Irish consumer more strongly, more effectively than say, is the practice in the UK? Well, one of the things that we sought out to explore in the research was to find out from consumers, British consumers, Irish consumers, about what are the channels that work best for them in terms of engagement, getting them building awareness around products, services and brands, in terms of actually facilitating purchases and then retaining loyalty afterwards. So that process of engagement through purchase to retention and loyalty is fundamentally important to all of us in terms of the tasks that we face day in, day out in marketing practice. So what do consumers in Britain and Ireland tell us about the right or the optimum mix of channels or marketing communications techniques to connect with them and to build interest in 2012? Well, you can see some significant differences here. TV and newspapers in particular ahead in terms of particularly the primary channels that people say in their experience as consumers in Ireland have provided them the best awareness of what's on offer, what's for sale out there, but also things like leaflets through the door drops coming through very strongly in terms of secondary routes, and letters and address post similar in both Britain and Ireland in those primary channels. The important thing here is that, of course, it's a mix of channels. Radio, of course, stands out again in terms of people finding radio as a source of awareness, of a source of interest in terms of what's out there that might be relevant to them, products and services. But it's a mix. Even advertisements on the web, we can see Irish consumers more open there. This reflects, I think, that very different level of trust that we've identified in media between British and Irish consumers, particularly where it is tied into Irish media, Irish channels that they already have a history with, a relationship with. So clearly a number of messages there about how you would connect with the consumer, how you get their interest and awareness in terms of your product or your service. But then how do you close the sale? What are the best channels in terms of people actually saying, I'm going to buy that? What we find here, TV still comes through, not least because it is obviously the media that we spend most time in consumption. Radio, again, stands out there. Newspapers to a certain extent as well. Leaflets, again, differences here in terms of and address posts in terms of consumer attitudes, but here it's much more at the secondary level, the follow-through level in terms of the other media. But again, what's interesting is that we can see quite significant differences between British and Irish consumers about the channels that in their experience, the media channels that have triggered purchase behaviour on their part in their experience. So those differences quite significant. So we've got engagement, we've got purchase. What about building loyalty? Once you've got the customer, once they've joined up, once they've purchased, you want to buy. We're all in the repeat business. You want them to buy from you again. Here, in terms of the channels people say are the most important, well, actually address post number 2 here, even slightly higher in the UK in terms of the post as a way of retaining loyalty. So the getting the sale is one task. Retaining loyalty, retention, and building on that is a different task. And what we see here is that this is where the direct channel becomes much stronger in terms of that task that we all face of keeping our customers, holding on to our customers. It's a crucially important task, I might add, because one of the other things that we've been tracking for the National Consumer Agency has been in relation to switching behaviour. And I just highlighted, this is from research published last week. It shows the percentage of people who switched in each of these categories in the past 12 months. We've been tracking it from November 2010 to May of last year to November 2011, so 3 different waves of it. You see the surge in people switching car insurance came back a little bit in the most recent wave, similarly with electricity supplies. But in some sectors like mobile phones, the incidence of switching appears to actually be increasing over time. And this is just switched in the past 12 months. When you widen that out to switching in the past 5 years, it grows even more significantly. But what it tells us is that, rather than just focusing on the numbers, is that the habit of switching is now firmly established in the zeitgeist, the mindset of the Irish consumer. So the loyalty agenda, the retention agenda, is now perhaps the most important issue facing marketers in 2012, and we see it indeed in the business tracking research that we do from Post that Amy referred to earlier, that customer retention, customer loyalty for many businesses who have come through the fall off in spending is now the #1 marketing priority. And you can see why, because when you're outside the circle of trust, then the willingness of people to switch from you as a provider of services or products or brands is that much higher. So it's really important to recognize the switching agenda, the retention agenda, and as per the previous slide, to recognize that you engage Irish consumers differently in relation to this switching pattern, the switching phenomenon, than you would UK consumers. So again, these are business realities that we all face in the context of a smaller spending pool of the recession that has happened. But there are a number of other differences I want to highlight before I wrap up. And it's about the differences in terms of how you build customer loyalty. Let me just kind of highlight a number of key differences here. The level of agreement with the statement, I prefer receiving vouchers or club loyalty rewards in the post. Massively higher difference between Britain and Ireland, massively higher level of agreement, 37% agreeing strongly with that statement versus a quarter of UK consumers. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us basically that the tools and techniques, be they of post, DM, and the combination of, for example, catalogue and online, these all provide important opportunities and differences between British and Irish consumers. I prefer to receive my bill statements by post. Again, a huge difference here. Despite 8 out of 10 adults online, a very large proportion, nearly a third of them, like to get their statements, etc., in the post. And another huge difference here, and I think this is an interesting one, level of agreement with the statement, I prefer to continue to receive direct mail than not to receive any direct mail at all. You can see there the differences between Britain and Ireland. Here, half of the population, over half the population, actually agree slightly or strongly with that statement. In Ireland, it's a far smaller proportion. In the UK, agree with that. 1 in 5 adults in Ireland agree strongly with that statement. They want to keep receiving direct mail rather than not receive any at all. So I think it's another indicator here of the trust and the empathy between Irish-based media, Irish-based marketing channels, and it's not just Post, that enables you as marketers targeting the Irish consumer to have a different impact, have a different relationship, and perhaps therefore enjoy more success as well. And I suppose as a final point in terms of the research findings, one of the other key things that I wanted to highlight in the research was around the attitude of consumers, Britain and Ireland, towards localised media, localised content, localised advertising. All consumption is local in the end. It's you and me at home, at work, in the shops, in the restaurants, in the pubs, consuming locally. And therefore, not surprisingly, that local, regional or national dynamic has a big bearing on our behaviour and on our preferences. But we put it to people in both Britain and Ireland about their feeling towards brands using marketing or advertising campaigns that are not specifically targeted at people of my nationality or doesn't represent my nationality. And what you can see here, very significant levels of the proportion of the population agreeing with that statement. In fact, you've got about 38% of people, nearly 4 out of 10 in Ireland. It's actually a higher proportion in the UK agreeing with that statement. They want advertising, they want media that is specifically targeted at them. They don't want the kind of generic, kind of globalized communications message that ultimately doesn't connect with them at the level of their psychological or emotional need state or indeed their preferences. Differences, of course, in terms of neither nor. UK consumers much more relaxed about it. And also differences in terms of disagreement between Britain and Ireland as well. If anything, Irish consumers have maybe stronger feelings about the matter, either pro or con, in terms of the feelings about brands and nationally specific media campaigns. But it's an important one nevertheless, because all of you are faced with this, particularly those of you operating in multinational organisations. You're faced with pressure around standardisation, around economies of scale, be it in terms of creativity, in terms of media buying, or indeed brand strategy for that matter. And yet we see these differences here, and we see significant proportions, and it varies to a degree by age, but not an awful lot, who are actually saying, you know what, talk to me in a localized medium in terms of content, in terms of messaging, and so on. So that's just an important point here, as all of us look to the challenges of recovery from the recession, and look to how we persuade colleagues, be they in media, be they in other parts of the organisation outside of Ireland, to think differently, behave differently, buy differently in terms of their marketing strategy for unlocking that share of the €81 billion prize in Irish consumer markets. So to sum up, in terms of what this is telling us, in terms of the way ahead, there's a big prize out there still. Very few of us are in businesses where a chunk of 81 billion doesn't matter. It actually matters a lot. That's why you're here today, because you want to have your share of that prize. It will grow even on the basis of very modest projections for recovery beyond next year out to 2016, which will provide expanding opportunities for products, for services, and for brands. So that's the size of the prize. But there are important points of difference. In fact, in certain regards, Irish consumers and British consumers are on divergent paths. They're on divergent paths at the economic level in terms of saving behaviour, and that rainy day fund that'll be worth nearly 50 billion by 2016. They're on very divergent paths in terms of demography and how you think about Irish consumers and their profile versus UK consumers, and even on divergent paths in terms of technology usage. We have the second highest usage of LinkedIn, for example, in the world after the Netherlands, well ahead of the UK. We have a very different pattern of adoption. The trend is going in the same direction, but the pattern is different in terms of the details. And also, of course, in terms of catalogues and those other factors that we talked about earlier on. And yet, despite similar levels of distrust in terms of Irish and British consumers and the bigger institutions on our lives, be it government, banks, business perhaps in general, Irish consumers are clearly more open to their media in terms of messages, in terms of engagement, not only engagement and that whole cut-through challenge, but also in terms of the purchase transaction and the retention agenda that faces all of us in terms of customer loyalty, customer satisfaction, and so on. But unlocking the opportunity really is about finding out the right combination of media and marketing activity, both Irish specific and best-in-class world-wide marketing behaviour. There's not a rallying call to just focus on Irish media or just use Irish content. It has to be the best of both. It has to be about recognising that Irish consumers are part of a bigger affluent global market, particularly in Europe, but as is evident from this research, we nevertheless approach our media and approach advertising and marketing with a very different mindset and a very different preference set in terms of consumption. So the challenge to you and the opportunity to you and to all of us, be it on PUST or indeed at Mark Research, in terms of connecting more effectively with the Irish marketplace, is about adopting what is best in class from around the world and fusing it what is appropriate and specific to the Irish marketplace in terms of media, in terms of messaging, and in terms of brand positioning. And if you can do that, then I think you will succeed. You'll also perhaps enjoy more than your fair share of that €81 billion prize that awaits you this year. Thank you.